never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Find another.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd Family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Hopefully everybody had a wonderful weekend and we're ready for another week. Hard to believe that for most college football teams, there's only 3 weeks left to go in the regular season. This upcoming weekend will be week number 11 and game number 10 for most college football teams. If you have any thoughts about any of the games you saw Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, or Saturday, please feel free to drop them in the comment section at any time. I don't know if you have seen the new AP college football poll that came out yesterday or not. If you have, let me know how you feel about it. If you have not, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it because now that we have the playoff poll, the AP poll really doesn't mean anything. The only reason I bring it up is because the top 5 in the AP poll is what I think the playoff poll will look like tomorrow night in the exact same order. Georgia, number 1, Ohio State, number 2, Michigan, number 3, TCU, number 4, and I believe Tennessee will be the highest ranked one-loss team at number 5. We will find out tomorrow night whether or not that is the case, but I think it will be the case. Believe it or not, actually yesterday morning when I first got up, my first thought was the top 5 is going to be Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, Tennessee. And then yesterday afternoon, I saw the AP poll and I was like, well, they agree with me, but we'll find out tomorrow night whether or not the playoff voters agree with me or not. Any thoughts on that? Please feel free to let me know. But on to some of the games we saw on Saturday. We'll start with the big one that everybody thought was going to be a lot closer game than what it was, and that was Georgia beating Tennessee by the score of 27-13. Late in the first half, I believe less than a minute to go, Tennessee was driving down the field and threw a pick in the end zone, and I believe that pretty much took away any chance they had at winning the game. And they had a couple of receivers in the end zone wide open, and Hendon Hooker just missed them. And when you play somebody as good as Georgia, when you get those kind of chances, opportunities, you can't miss them, and they missed them. But I don't think Tennessee will fall further than 5. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they will. But unless Ole Miss wins the West, which is still a possibility, but any other team, with the exception of Ole Miss, that wins the West, they will have at least 2 losses. If Ole Miss runs the table, they'll only have 1 loss. But whether it's LSU or Alabama, both of those teams have 2 losses so far. So unless it's Ole Miss, if any other team wins the West, being a 2-loss team, we have yet to see a 2-loss team make the playoffs. So Tennessee still has an outside shot of making it as long as Alabama or LSU win the West. If Ole Miss goes 11-1 and they end up winning the West, Tennessee will not get in unless Ole Miss beats Georgia in the championship game and knocks Georgia out. That's the only hope Tennessee has left right now is for Ole Miss to run the table, which would include beating Alabama this upcoming Saturday. And if Ole Miss runs the table and then beats Georgia in the conference championship game, Tennessee has an outside shot at being an 11-1 team and getting in, even though they won't win their conference or their division. But if anything else happens, I don't think Tennessee gets in. But it was a good game. It was just a lot lower scoring than anybody thought it would be. And as I said, I believe that interception thrown late in the first half took away any chance Tennessee had of winning the game. They had a chance to score, at least get a field goal, and go into the locker room with some momentum. But that pick just took all that away. And I think that was it. And they knew that was their chance, and they blew it. Ohio State won, but the reason why I think they'll stay at number 2 is, for one, Georgia beat a better team, but for two, Ohio State definitely played their worst game of the year. Had they played anybody else except for Northwestern, they probably would have got beat. They looked absolutely atrocious, just could not move the ball at all. I think they might have had 300 yards of offense in the whole game. They just looked pitiful, but they do defeat Northwestern by the score of 21-7. I don't really put a lot of stock into that because, for one, everybody has a bad game. That was Ohio State's bad game. They were just lucky enough to be able to win it, even though they were bad. But it's funny how we as humans, and if you're honest with yourself, you're included, all of us have had days on our job, whatever our profession happens to be, where we go in and we just do not put forth our full 100% effort. For whatever reason, whatever the case may be, we all have days where we go in and we're just lackadaisical. And there's things that we could do that we just don't feel like doing, and sometimes don't do. And a lot of times we're wrapping the day up and something ain't been done, and we'll say, I'll do it tomorrow. I just don't feel like doing it today. Because we all have those days where we just don't feel like putting forth all effort. But yet, even though we're like that, for some reason we think that football teams ain't like that. And we think they're not supposed to have bad days. They're not supposed to have bad games. They're not supposed to ever have a day where they play and they're like, you know what? I just don't have it today. Because guess what? If we have those days, they do too. And for Ohio State, Saturday was definitely that day. And Notre Dame defeated Clemson by the score of 35-14. I loved Dabo's comments after the game. Dabo said, we got our butts kicked. There's just no other way to put it. And they did. The only bad part was they were off last week. You had 2 weeks to prepare, and it looked like they did no preparation whatsoever. Dabo even talked about his press conference on Tuesday, how Notre Dame has blocked some kind of kick 3 straight games, and they had to be on the lookout for a blocked field goal or blocked punt. And then sure enough, they blocked a punt. Guy comes right up the middle with nobody even attempting to block him. Now, Clemson loses pretty much one game almost every single year like everybody else does. But most of the time when they get beat, it's just because they got beat by a better team, or they just had too many turnovers, too many penalties. But this game, there was none of that. They just flat out got beat on both sides of the ball. Nothing you can say about it. They got beat. You can't defend it because there's nothing to defend. There was not 3 or 4 plays they could have did differently and had a chance. They could have changed the whole quarter. They still got beat. They just got beat. But it does happen. But if you follow the channel, you know, before the year started, I said Clemson would go 11-1. And I believe I even said that I predict one of the losses would be to Florida State, NC State, or Notre Dame. They got by Florida State. They got by NC State. But they lost to Notre Dame. So they're actually right where I thought they would be right now. But the only concerning thing is that it seems like their offense has gone backwards. I don't know what's happened, but it seems like they hit their peak in that Wake Forest game, and ever since they played that game, they have progressively gotten worse. With the exception of Will Shipley, who is still Will Shipley, the rest of their playmakers have just disappeared. I don't know what's happened, but their offense has definitely gone backwards. So now that Jeff Scott has been fired by South Florida, most Clemson fans want Jeff Scott to come back to Clemson, even though when he was there the last time he was a co-coordinator. Most people still want him to come back. I thought Brandon Streeter was going to be the answer on offense, and I'm still not going to say he's not because he still might be. But if the offense doesn't show signs of getting better again, he's definitely not the answer. But the way the year started, I thought, okay, Dabo made the right choice. Brandon Streeter's definitely the right decision. But now that our offense is slowly going down, I'm not sure that Brandon Streeter is the answer. He might be in over his head. But if Clemson plays the way they played Saturday night this week versus Louisville, they'll lose again to Louisville this upcoming Saturday. LSU defeated Alabama by the score of 32-31. The game ended regulation 24-24, and in overtime, when LSU scored, instead of kicking the extra point, they decided to go for two. They made it. They win the game by 1 point. I know it seems like forever since Alabama lost 2 games in a regular season, but actually it was 2019. Just 3 years ago, they lost 2 games in a regular season and missed the playoffs. And I think they'll miss the playoffs again this year. And I'm not so sure that they finished 10-2. I'm not so sure they beat Ole Miss this week. I know I've talked about it before, but Alabama has the talent. But for whatever reason, this year's team just isn't gelling well together. But it seems like to me, ever since about 2018, the Alabama program has slowly gone downhill. And I don't mean downhill like they're 7-5, but I mean they've gone downhill from where they used to be, which was being a top 5 team, if not a top 2 team every year. It seemed like for about 10 years straight, they either won the national championship or lost the national championship game every year. Now that's not the case. I know they won it in 2020, but 2020 was a weird year where everybody got a pass, whether you were good or bad. So we really, truly don't know how good Bama was that year. But outside of that year, for about the last 5 years, I have felt like Alabama has slowly gone downhill as a program. And they've gone from being a top 5 team to being maybe a top 15 team, which is about where I think they are right now. And I still say that Nick Saban has about 3 more years. He's going to retire, if not before then. But I believe Nick Saban also knows something is wrong with this year's team because I watched his press conference late Saturday night, early Sunday morning after the game, and he wasn't near as fired up and quirky and mad and upset as he normally is. So I believe he knows that there's just something that's missing with this year's football team, and nobody knows what it is, but it's definitely missing, and they still have not yet figured out what it is. Michigan defeated Rutgers by the score of 52-17. Michigan actually trailed at one point in the game, but it was really, really early in the first half, but they actually were trailing, and I thought, Rutgers going to give them a game, and then that was it. TCU defeats Texas Tech by the score of 34-24 to remain undefeated on the season. Oregon defeats Colorado by the score of 49-10. Texas beats Kansas State 34-27. And Oregon right now is playing some phenomenal football. I believe the only thing, honestly, that's holding Oregon back from being in the top 4 right now is the way they lost. Because most people will tell you it's one thing to lose, like Tennessee lost Saturday by 2 touchdowns. It's one thing to lose by 1 touchdown or 10 points. But Oregon got slaughtered. And when you have a game where you look that bad on both sides of the ball, there's going to be a lot of people going to look at you and say, top four teams don't get beat that bad. It's one thing to get beat, but when you get beat that bad, that's embarrassing. And I think a lot of people still are holding that against Oregon. They've definitely been a whole different team since that game, but that game was an embarrassment. Utah defeats Arizona by the score of 45-20. Penn State defeats Indiana 45-14. Illinois, who had been playing some really, really, really good football, looking like they were going to run away with their half of the Big Ten, they lost to Michigan State by the score of 23-15. North Carolina wins again. They defeat Virginia by the score of 31-28. If they keep winning, they're going to be a top 10 team by the time the regular season ends. I believe the best thing that could have happened in North Carolina was Sam Howell leaving. I always thought he was overrated. I always thought he was a stat stuffer. And now they have Drake May, and they look like a completely different football team. Drake May is the real deal. Their defense is still an abomination, but Drake May is the real deal. Kansas finally gets back on the winning side. They defeat Oklahoma State by the score of 37-16. Tulane defeats Tulsa by the score of 27-13. Pittsburgh beats Syracuse 19-9. NC State defeats Wake Forest by the score of 30-21. Central Florida wins again. They defeat Memphis by the score of 35-28. Air Force wins the Commanders-in-Chief trophy for the first time since 2016, I believe, by defeating Army by the score of 13-7. Kentucky defeats Missouri by the score of 21-17. Minnesota, after a pitiful first half where they were trailing 10-0 at halftime, comes back and defeats Nebraska by the score of 20-13. A few quick thoughts on the Kentucky game. First of all, I feel bad for Missouri. Now, they've had a couple of games this year where they just got blowed out of the water. But for the most part, every team they've played this year, they have competed and played really good and found a way to lose each game. It looked like they were going to defeat Kentucky Saturday, and Kentucky was punting late in the game. I think it was like 2.5, maybe 3 minutes to go, and Kentucky was punting from about their own 30-yard line, and the snap went way over the punter's head. He had to run all the way back inside the 5-yard line to pick it up. So at that time, if you're a defender, you think the ball going that far over his head with 5 or 6 defensive players coming, he's not going to try to punt it. He's either going to pick it up and run with it, or he's going to fall on it. But he actually picked it up and punted it from about the 2.5-yard line, and a Missouri player just clobbered him. So, of course, he got called for roughing the punter, and Kentucky kept the ball, got a first down, hung on to win the game. So by the letter of the law, it was the right call. The refs were right. It was roughing the punter. I mean, easily. He tackled the guy. He about destroyed the guy. But if you're a defensive player running after the guy and the ball goes 10 yards over his head, you're thinking, okay, he's going to pick that up and run with it. So your mindset has totally changed from blocking the punt to tackling the guy. But you tackled the guy and he kicked it, so it was a penalty. But Missouri, they hang with everybody. They just can't figure out how to win. Iowa defeats Purdue by the score of 24-3. And as bad as Iowa's offense has been this year, that's an offensive explosion for them. So they've had back-to-back games where they've scored 24 or more points. And as bad as they've been, that's 75 points to them. So maybe they have finally figured out what was wrong with their offense. Georgia Tech wins the battle of the Techs. They defeat Virginia Tech by the score of 28-17. 27. Georgia Tech is now 4-5 on the season. Still got an outside shot at a bowl game. I don't think they'll get there. I believe they'll win this week, but I think that's it. But even if they don't win another game and they finish 4-8, it's definitely better than what they've been doing so far under Jeff Collins. But I do think they'll win this week because I think Miami has just quit. But Georgia Tech's interim coach is funny because if you watch them play, you can tell they're definitely better than what they were any time under Jeff Collins. But some people say that hiring this guy would be the biggest mistake they've ever made. So I really don't know if they're going to keep this guy around or not, but they're definitely playing better this year than they ever did any time under Jeff Collins. Baylor defeats Oklahoma by the score of 38-35. Liberty wins again. They defeat Arkansas by the score of 21-19. And I know that Liberty's coached by Hugh Freeze, and I know his name is one of the names that's mentioned now pretty much any time a big-time program has a head coaching vacancy. But if Hugh Freeze ever leaves Liberty, he's an absolute moron because he's making $5 million a year at Liberty. And Liberty is just like what I was talking about with Kentucky a few weeks back, how Mark Stoops has it made. Hugh Freeze does too. You're talking about $5 million a year at Liberty. And he could coach there for the next 100 years and go 9-3 every year, and he would never lose his job. And the way he recruits, he could pretty much go 9-3 at Liberty, if not better, every single year. They've still got a shot at a New Year's Six bowl game this year. I don't know if they'll get it. I think it's going to be down between them and Tulane. But right now, Tulane has a small advantage. But still, they've got a shot at a New Year's Six bowl game. Everybody thought they were just good because Malik Willis was there. He's gone now. They're still good. Hugh Freeze is just a good football coach. Off the field, you can question. But on the field, you can't question. And I've talked about it before with Arkansas, but I think Sam Pittman from the get-go had a low ceiling. I think he was about a 9-win coach, and that's all he's ever going to be. But he's such a likable guy, and he got to 9 wins so quickly that I think when he got there so quickly, everybody thought, okay, we were wrong. He's a top 10 coach. He's not. He might be a top 10 coach as far as just coaching, but he's not top 10 with all the other intangibles. And looking at Arkansas' schedule the rest of the year, I think they go 6-6 maybe. So I think Sam Pittman has peaked at Arkansas, and he's now going to consistently be a 7 or 8 win coach. But it's definitely better than they've been in a long time. But I hope that since he peaked so early and now he's looking like he's going the wrong way, Arkansas doesn't run him off. He is a very likable guy, but I think his ceiling from the get-go was about 8 or 9 wins. That's what he is. And we got to talk about this game only because of the score. SMU defeated Houston by the score of 77-63. So if you like high-scoring games with no defense, that was definitely the game for you. And then Mississippi State in overtime defeats Auburn 39-33. And the only reason why I bring this game up is because Mississippi State actually had a huge lead in the game and blew it. And Mike Leach actually walked to the bench and he took every single folding chair the Bulldogs had on the sideline and folded them up and put them down. He said the way they were playing, they didn't deserve to sit down. You gotta like Mike Leach. He is a character. Boy, he's an absolute character. If he was in the wrestling business, he'd be my all-time favorite wrestler. South Carolina defeats Vanderbilt by the score of 38-27. So the Gamecocks are now bowl eligible, which is good because I'm not sure they win a game the rest of the season, but they're definitely going to a bowl game. Florida State just absolutely destroyed Miami. I knew Florida State would win the game, and I'm not so sure Florida State loses the rest of the year. They're definitely going the right direction, but it looks like Miami has just absolutely quit. But I thought since they played Florida State, that's supposed to be a rivalry, they would at least show up in that game. They didn't. Florida State wins it by the score of 45-3. Miami should be ashamed of themselves. You start out the season that hyped over the brand new coach you have, and not only have you not gotten better, I think you've gotten worse. And then the late game Saturday night, USC struggled, didn't look too good, but they defeat California by the score of 41-35. That's just some of the big games from Saturday in the world of college football. Again, any thoughts on it, please feel free to let me know. And if you have any early predictions on what you project the playoff poll to look like tomorrow night, please feel free to let me know. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. Did you hear about the guy who invented the knock knock joke? He won the Nobel Prize. And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.